Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving deep today into electrical safety culture. All those decisions and mindsets and actions that determine whether somebody gets to go home safe at the end of the day.
It's really fascinating. It's not just about knowing all the rules, but actually understanding the why behind all those rules and then how they actually play out in real world situations.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we've got a really cool mix of sources to kind of guide us. Everything from safety manuals and standards like OSHA and NFPA 70E. We even have some historical accounts. And honestly, some of these will make you appreciate how far we've come. I mean, can you believe that people used to test voltage with their tongues?
Yeah, it's true. And it's shocking as that is, I think it kind of highlights a crucial point. Safety practices, they change as our understanding of electrical hazards grows. What was once considered, normal is now recognized as, well, dangerous.
Right, yeah. Okay, so let's start with something that might seem kind of obvious, but I think is often overlooked. And that's, just recognizing the hazards themselves. It's like
Right.
they say, you can't fix what you don't acknowledge, right?
Absolutely. We're talking about fire, falls, shock, and the one that often gets the most attention, arc flash, which, can release an incredible amount of energy. It's interesting. You can kind of compare driving safety to electrical safety. Like, we all know the rules of the road and the importance of wearing seatbelts, but do we apply that same level of awareness and caution when we're working around electricity?
That's a great analogy. And it makes you wonder, Matt, are we as diligent about electrical safety as we are about, driving safety?
That's the question. And the statistics, honestly, are a little sobering. Historically, almost one worker every single day suffers an electrical burn. That's according to the BLS data.
Yeah.
And that's just a real stark reminder of what's at stake.
Yeah. That this isn't just some abstract concept. This is about real people and their lives.
Absolutely. And it kind of brings us to this idea of a culture of energized work. Our sources, they paint this picture of an environment where working on live circuits, it was unfortunately the norm for a very long time.
So it wasn't even seen as risky. It was just like how things were done.
Exactly. And there's this persistent mindset. Even today, this I'm an electrical worker, working stuff hot, that's just part of my job attitude. But that really downplays the very real dangers involved.
Yeah, it's almost like accepting danger is like, an inherent part of the job. I'm curious, though, is it always the worker's choice? I mean, our sources mention pressure from like customers and supervisors to work quickly, even if it means, cutting corners on safety.
Yeah, and that's a really crucial point. The pressure to keep things running, to meet deadlines, to avoid inconveniencing customers, it can create a very dangerous environment where safety takes a backseat.
Yeah, and our sources even had quotes from supervisors, things like, you can't shut down that assembly line because it will cost too much.
Which really highlights the short-sightedness that sometimes prevails. Yes, there are costs associated with, shutting things down and taking the time to do things safely. But what about the cost of an accident, right? The human cost, the financial cost, the reputational damage.
Yeah, seems like a classic case of penny wise and pound foolish.
Yeah,
So where do regulations like OSHA and NFPA 70E fit into all of this? I mean, aren't they designed to protect workers?
they are. But what's fascinating is that even with these regulations in place, that culture of energized work, it persists. And it really suggests that simply having rules, it's not enough.
So is it a case of people not knowing the rules, or is it more about, a reluctance to actually follow them?
Well, our sources kind of indicate that both factors are at play. There's this lack of awareness and understanding of those standards, but there's also this tendency to kind of view them as inconvenient obstacles rather than, essential safeguards.
It sounds like there's a real disconnect between what the regulations say and what actually happens, on the ground.
Exactly. And it raises an important question. Does most energized work even meet the very strict justifications that are outlined by OSHA and NFPA 70E? In a lot of cases, the answer is probably no.
So we've got this, complex interplay of factors, a historical culture that downplays the risk, the pressure to put speed over safety, and maybe just a lack of understanding or respect for the regulations.
Yeah.
To really understand how this can lead to, real world consequences, let's actually delve into a case study from our sources, a tragic incident involving an electrician's helper who was fatally electrocuted. Man, that case study It's just a real stark reminder of how high the stakes are when it comes to electrical safety. This
Yeah.
isn't just about numbers and regulations. It's about like real people and the potential for, well, for tragedy when safety is compromised.
Absolutely. And it really, I think, underscores the need to move beyond simply acknowledging the hazards and really start delving into the practical steps we can take to create a truly safe environment.
Yeah. You mentioned OSHA and NFPA 70E earlier. Those are like the big names when we talk about electrical safety, right?
Yeah.
Can you maybe unpack those a bit for us? Like, what do they actually say about working on or near energized equipment?
Well, they both emphasize that de-energizing equipment before working on it is really the priority. Like that's the default. That's the safest approach.
That makes sense. But I imagine there are exceptions, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't just shut down like a whole city every time a street light needs to be fixed.
You're exactly right. Both OSHA and NFPA 70E, they recognize that there are limited circumstances where working on energized equipment might be unavoidable. For example, if de-energizing would actually introduce additional hazards or if it's just impossible due to, the way the equipment's designed.
Okay, so it's not like a blanket ban, but it's definitely not something to be taken lightly. What really stood out to me in our sources was this idea of a hierarchy of risk control methods. Can you maybe explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a systematic way of thinking about how to mitigate hazards, like the most effective method is elimination. Get rid of the hazard completely. If that's not possible, then you move down the hierarchy to substitution. Replace the hazard with something less dangerous.
Okay, so elimination substitution are like at the top. What comes next?
Then you've got engineering controls. Those are like physical changes to the workplace itself to reduce the risk. Things like machine guards or insulation on electrical wires.
So making the environment itself safer.
Exactly. And then you've got administrative controls. Those involve changing the way people work, like implementing procedures or training programs.
And then finally, we've got PPE.
Personal protective equipment.
Right. PPE is kind of your last line of defense. It's important, but it should never be the primary means of protection.
Right. So working on energized equipment, it falls pretty far down on that list. It does. That's why OSHA and NFPA 70E, they have really strict requirements for justifying energized work. You have to demonstrate that all those other methods, they've been considered, they've been ruled out, and that there's a documented reason why it's absolutely necessary. It's not just about convenience or speed.
But isn't there a risk that those justifications could be like stretched a little bit? And our sources kind of hinted that there might be a gap between what the regulations say and what actually happens in some workplaces.
That's a valid concern. There's always a risk that safety can be compromised in the name of expediency or cost cutting. And that's where a strong safety culture becomes so crucial.
Because a culture of safety, that goes beyond just following like the letter of the law, right? It's about creating an environment where like everyone understands the risks. Everyone's empowered to prioritize safety, even when it's like inconvenient or costly.
That's exactly it. It's about shifting the mindset from, we've always done it this way to what's the safest way to do this? It's about making sure workers feel comfortable speaking up if they see something unsafe without fear of, reprisal.
Speaking of speaking up, our sources pointed out something that I thought was really interesting. This idea that sometimes the costs associated with injuries, with citations, they're not properly accounted for. Like if those costs aren't directly assigned to specific jobs, it can create kind of a distorted picture of profitability.
That's a really critical point. If a company isn't accurately tracking the true costs of unsafe practices, it can create kind of a perverse incentive to cut corners on safety. It's really essential to have a system that reflects the full, financial and human impact of accidents and violations.
Yeah, it's about like aligning the incentives with safety, making sure that everybody understands that a safe workplace is also a more productive and profitable workplace.
It's in the long run, right? So how do we bridge that gap then between, the regulations and the reality on the ground? How do we move from a culture of, complacency to a culture of proactive safety?
It's a multifaceted challenge. It starts with education, making sure that workers understand, not just the rules, but but the reasons behind them. It's about providing, comprehensive training programs that go beyond just the basics and really empower workers to identify and mitigate hazards.
And it's about leadership, right? Management, setting the tone, demonstrating that commitment to safety and holding everybody accountable for following the rules.
Absolutely. Leaders, they have a huge responsibility to create a culture where safety is truly valued and rewarded. Where workers aren't pressured to take shortcuts and where there are clear consequences for violating those safety protocols. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk, right? So to shift gears a bit, I want to talk about something that really intrigued me in our sources. Those historical methods of voltage testing. I mean, touching wires to your tongue, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of how far we've come in terms of understanding those electrical hazards, In the early days of electricity, before we had, sophisticated testing equipment and a deep appreciation for the risks involved, people relied on some pretty unorthodox methods to figure out if a circuit was live.
I'm almost afraid to ask, but what were some of those methods?
Well, for lower voltage circuits, some workers would literally touch the wires to their tongues. They believed that if they could sense, a tingling or a metallic taste, that meant the circuit was live.
I can't even imagine.
It's incredible, isn't it? Of course, this method was incredibly unreliable and could easily lead to burns or worse. I guess it's a testament to human resilience or something.
Or maybe just a lack of awareness of just how dangerous electricity can be. What about higher voltage circuits? Surely they didn't use their tongues for those, right?
Well, you might be surprised. For voltages up to around 110 volts, the finger method was a popular, albeit incredibly risky, technique. Workers would touch the wires to their fingers, hoping to sense that tingling sensation. And to make matters worse, they would often lick their fingers first, believing that, that it would enhance their sensitivity.
It's amazing that anyone survived those early days of electrical work.
It is. And these practices really highlight how far we've come in terms of understanding and respecting the power of electricity. But it's also a reminder that complacency can be dangerous. Just because we've, made progress doesn't mean we can afford to let our guard down.
Yeah, it's a continuous journey, right? Always learning and adapting and striving to improve. Speaking of learning, we need to talk about something called the FACE program, which our sources highlight as a really crucial resource for understanding and preventing, workplace fatalities, including those related to electrical hazards.
Yeah, it's a valuable program. FACE stands for Fatality Assessment and Control Evaluation, and it's a NIOSH initiative. And it's all about investigating workplace fatalities to identify those contributing factors and develop recommendations to prevent similar incidents from happening again.
Okay, so tell us more about it. Like, how does it actually work? Do they just show up at any workplace accident?
Not exactly. The FACE program, it focuses on specific types of fatal incidents, including those involving machinery, falls, confined spaces, and of course, electrocutions.
So they're like specialists in these high-risk areas.
Yeah, precisely. And they rely on a variety of sources to identify potential cases for investigation. News reports, OSHA reports, even referrals from other safety organizations.
Okay. So once they identify a case, what happens next?
Well, a team of trained investigators is dispatched to the site to conduct a very thorough investigation. They'll interview witnesses, examine the scene, analyze the equipment, review company safety procedures, all with the goal of piecing together what led to the fatality.
Sounds like a very detailed and meticulous process.
It is, and importantly, the FACE Pair program, it's not about assigning blame or finding fault. Their primary goal is to understand those contributing factors and develop recommendations to prevent, similar incidents.
That's really important. Like learning from the past, not pointing fingers. Do the reports actually identify the specific companies or individuals involved?
No, and that's a really key aspect of the FACE program. They've maintained strict confidentiality. The names of victims, companies, witnesses, they're never revealed in their reports.
So it's all about focusing on the lessons learned, not on punishment. Makes sense, especially if you want companies to actually cooperate with the investigations.
Exactly. It encourages openness and transparency, allowing the investigators to get, a clearer picture of what happened without, companies fearing repercussions.
Have there been any specific findings or recommendations from FACE investigations related to electrical safety that really stand out to you?
Absolutely. Over the years, they've identified some really common contributing factors in electrical fatalities. Things like inadequate training, failure to follow, lockout, tagout procedures, lack of proper risk assessment.
So it often comes back to those core principles of electrical safety that we've been talking about, right? Like understanding the hazards, following the rules, having a culture that prioritizes safety.
It does. And their reports, they often emphasize the need for a strong safety culture, effective training programs, strict adherence to those safety regulations. One thing that really stood out to me was the emphasis on going beyond just providing PPE.
Yeah.
Workers need to understand when and how to use it properly, and that it's not a foolproof solution.
Right. It's about layering those protections, having the right procedures, the right training, and then as a last resort, the right equipment. I'm curious though, what happens to those FACE recommendations? Do they just sit on a shelf somewhere?
Yeah.
Or do they actually lead to change?
Well, the FACE program works really hard to ensure that their findings have real world impact. They share their recommendations with OSHA, with NIOSH, other regulatory bodies, and they often work directly with industry groups to develop new safety guidelines and training materials.
So it's a collaborative effort to improve safety kind of across the board.
Yeah.
Not just a one-off investigation, right?
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even when a tragedy occurs, we can learn from it and take steps to prevent it from happening again. The FACE program is really about turning a tragic loss into valuable knowledge that can save lives.
It's both heartbreaking and inspiring to see how the FACE program turns those tragic incidents into opportunities for learning and prevention.
Yeah.
Their work really highlights the importance of continuous improvement when it comes to safety.
It does. It's a reminder that safety is not a static concept. It's an ongoing process of identifying hazards, assessing risks, implementing controls. In that process, it involves everyone, from the workers on the front lines to management to the organizations that are setting the standards.
And it's not just about reacting to incidents after they occur, right? It's about proactively creating a culture where safety is ingrained in everything we do.
Absolutely. It's about shifting from a reactive mindset to a proactive one, from simply complying with the rules to actively seeking ways to improve safety. That's where the real progress happens.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into electrical safety culture, what are some of the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think there are several. First, electrical hazards, they are real, they're potentially deadly, and we can never afford to become complacent. Second, regulations are in place for a reason. Understanding them, following them, that's crucial for everyone's safety.
And third, it's not just about individual workers taking responsibility. It's about creating a culture of safety at every level of an organization. It requires commitment from management, clear communication, and a willingness to prioritize safety over expediency or cost cutting.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about moving beyond that mentality of it won't happen to me, and recognizing that safety is a shared responsibility. It's about, empowering everyone to identify hazards, to speak up when they see something unsafe, and advocate for that continuous improvement.
I think that's a great message to end on, that safety is a journey we all take together. And on that note, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question, something to ponder as they go about their work.
Knowing the dangers of electricity, the importance of regulations, the tragic consequences that can occur when safety is overlooked. What would you do if you were pressured to work on energized equipment? Would you speak up? Would you refuse the work? What steps would you take to ensure your safety and the safety of those around you?
Tough question,
Yeah.
but it's one we all need to ask ourselves, right?
Check.
Because ultimately, our safety, the safety of those around us, it depends on the choices we make. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into electrical safety culture. We hope you found it insightful and and empowering.
Stay safe out there.
Until next time. Yeah, it's about having those conversations, right? And making sure everybody's on the same page. Our sources mentioned a bunch of different programs and initiatives aimed at, promoting electrical safety. Anything from like industry-specific training to national campaigns and conferences. Are there any that you think are particularly effective?
There are some really great ones out there. And I think what makes them effective is that they take a multifaceted approach. They combine education, awareness, and practical skills training. Like one that comes to mind is the Electrical Safety Foundation International, ESFI. They have a ton of resources available online, toolkits, videos, fact sheets, all aimed at educating the public and workers about electrical hazards.
And I remember seeing something from them about the importance of having a qualified electrician do any electrical work in your home, like not DIYing everything.
Exactly. It's so tempting to, try to save money and do things ourselves.
Yeah.
But when it comes to electricity, it's just not worth the risk. A qualified electrician, they have the training, they have the experience, they have the knowledge to do the work safely and correctly.
Right. Better to be safe than sorry. Another topic that came up in our sources is this idea of complacency. Like even when we know the rules and we have the right training, it's easy to, get a little too comfortable, a little too confident and let our guard down. How do we combat that?
Yeah, complacency it's a real danger. And I think, one way to combat it is to constantly remind ourselves of the potential consequences, to revisit those case studies, those accident reports, those near misses, to really kind of keep that sense of vulnerability and awareness top of mind.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, right? Familiarity breeds contempt. The more we're around something, the less dangerous it might seem, even if it really is.
That's right. And another thing that can help is to encourage a culture of questioning and continuous improvement. To not just accept things as they are, but to always be looking for ways to make things safer, to identify potential hazards, to speak up when something doesn't seem right.
So to really kind of foster that sense of ownership over safety.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, safety it's everyone's responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of the safety manager or the supervisor. It's everyone on the team looking out for themselves and for each other.
And that's really what electrical safety culture is all about, right? It's about creating an environment where safety is valued, where it's prioritized, where it's everyone's top priority.
Exactly. And where everyone goes home safe at the end of the day.
Well said. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into electrical safety culture. Hopefully you found it insightful, informative, maybe even a little bit inspiring to take a look at your own workplaces and see how you can contribute to a culture of safety.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for being here with us today. And until next time, stay safe out there.